Ladies and gentlemen of the Backstage Brawl community, this is for a 60-minute time limit. And I am your host, as always, the Golden Child, a.k.a. Jean-Louis, alongside with Tyler Hicks, a.k.a. Kid Ty, here bringing you the first episode of Bell to Bell. How you doing, Kid Ty?
Oh boy, we get to talk about some independent topics here on this show. Topics that we don't necessarily get the time to talk about on the podcast unless we go on a crazy this digression that leads to a very impassioned rant. I'm a victim of this,
We all
but
are. But yeah.
but at least in this forum, as I get a call from Arizona, screw that. We have we have ourselves some things we want to discuss, things that, there are a lot of topics in the wrestling world that get discussed often. You mean the podcasts in general, everyone kind of does podcasts now. We're all kind of talking about the same things. But there's some isolated topics in pro wrestling that don't get touched on a lot until it's like blatantly on television and now everybody wants to talk about it. So the whole purpose of this show is to talk about things that are also on our mind that might not be the most relevant topics to the company in terms of like day-to-day programming, shows, social media and all that, but they are pretty integral and they do play big roles in what you see. So our first topic today, our first topic for this series, I should say, is the topic of weapons.
Yeah, and
Something
we
that's
just happened to finish Hell in a Cell. This past Sunday night, we saw a litany of those weapons. Of course, as you saw, like Halloween Havoc was this last night, so we saw a litany of that. But on the main roster, I mean, like Sasha versus Bailey, Roman versus Jay, Randy versus Drew McIntyre, they all followed a similar hardcore side of the spectrum. But there's one little minute detail that kind of stands out and has kind of more or less been normalized to the detriment in ways of the wrestling industry as it pertains to WWE, and that is the use of weapons. Kid Ty, expound upon that bad boy.
so for the past decade or so, I believe it was January of 2010, a rule was put in place by the WWE as a response to a lot of criticism of concussions, which was an ongoing conversation heading out of ruthless aggression. The fact that there were a lot of unprotected chair shots in the history of professional wrestling, which have led to many wrestlers getting unneeded concussions and also leading to a lot of tragedies, most notably the Chris Benoit double murder suicide as a result of all of the concussions he took, many of which were most likely directly caused by unprotected chair shots amongst the headbutts and everything else. There was a discussion going in WWE of what to do about that as they were trying to get more aggressive on their concussion protocol. And they ended up banning chair shots to the head, intentional chair shots to the head. So when wrestlers would like pitch ideas for matches and they would try to organize how they were going to use their weapons when they were going about their matches, they couldn't hit each other unprotected in the head or intentionally in the head at all. So even if you put the hand up, it would still be considered, you'd still get fined the same way you would if it were unprotected. And ever since that kind of came into effect, one thing that I've noticed over the past 10 years is the fact that when you see a chair be used, you can kind of predict exactly what's going to happen. Now, we've kind of become desensitized to chair shots over the years as wrestling fans because we have problems. We have a desire for combat. But a chair shot to the head always felt brutal, no matter who was doing it, because it was a shot to your head, the impact of the swing. Sometimes, depending on how hard certain people would crack you over the head with it, it would amplify, levels to the chair shot type deal. Ask Undertaker and Mr. Kennedy in 2007, or Undertaker period with a chair. um it never really got old even if you were used to it because you always recognized it as one of the deadliest shots you could take in a ring, and that eventually became very quite literal. However, in the current era, the past decade, anytime you see somebody get hit with a chair, it's always a gut shot with the chair, sort of like how people would get hit with a sledgehammer
Yeah,
back
it's
in the
a
day,
it's
the
a gut
midsection,
shot into like
a
shot to
crack
the
to the
back.
back.
Yeah.
A crack to the back. It happens every time. Now we've seen variations of it. People getting hit in the leg with a chair. We saw that at Hell in a Cell actually with Orton and Drew McIntyre. We've seen people get their backs brutalized with chairs, which is commonplace. We're used to that, right? But a little bit of the danger factor of the chair has been taken away for the proper reasons. But it does feel like there's a void in chairs and weapons in general in WWE, because they can't go very extreme with what they're doing. Like it's sort of like this weird, like, I guess catch 22 is the term for it, where it's like you're happy that the wrestlers are safer and they don't have to worry about unneeded concussions on top of the multiple concussions you can get from just regular in-ring action. But in the same token, the chair shot was an element of danger that a lot of fans liked, and it did add to a lot of stories and sell the brutal nature of the business. It sold like the evil intent of heels. It sold how far people were willing to go to hurt somebody, and it really did add to the story and the angles and the direction of where a lot of these like stories would go. So you kind of sit there and think to yourself, well, if that's the case, how does WWE continue? Like, how do they portray brutal, like the brutalization of wrestlers, I guess for lack of a better term, or how do they portray getting hurt with the weapons without their go-to chair shot to the head? And after the chair shot to the head was banned, one weapon that came to prominence and now is kind of commonplace in the current WWE are kendo sticks. We saw kendo sticks with Singapore Canes, in ECW with Sandman. We've seen them across the world. But in WWE, I'd say once the ECW thing really started to come into effect, as early as the first One Night Stand, kendo sticks started to slowly get integrated in WWE. But after the chair shot to the head was banned, kendo sticks started to be used a lot more often to sell how brutal a weapon could hit flesh without necessarily having to hit somebody in the head. Like when you see somebody get hit with a kendo stick, you can see the welts start to form on their body, the marks being made. They're getting cracked all over the place, and a lot of times the wrestlers are swinging wildly, so you don't exactly know where it's going to land. And a lot of that would make you believe, well, wouldn't that be a proper replacement for the chair shot, since the chair shot had a similar effect? The issue is that once people started to catch on to the whole like, oh, kendo sticks are basically like a replacement, you started to get a weird feeling about kendo sticks because you started to see them way too often, right? It seems like anytime somebody goes under the ring, it's either a chair or a kendo stick. And then after a while, you started to get desensitized to the kendo stick because it's like, it hurts, you can hear it hurts, you can see it hurts, similar to a chair, but it doesn't feel the same. It feels like a substitute because we can't be this brutal in this case. And you appreciate them for trying a different option. But after a while, you kind of just sit there and go, is it only going to be a chair and a kendo stick people are really going to use as weapons? Like, aren't there other ways, more variety? Like, you have to, like, what I'm basically proposing is, I think WWE is at a point where we need more variety with weapons and in the matches that they correspond to, more variety in the weapons and the creativity and the spots you can use to make these weapons matter. Because if you already go into a hardcore match of any kind, doesn't have to be a Hell in a Cell. Let's take TLC off the page because TLCs are usually pretty creative on their own. But if you take away like ladder matches in general and you just talk about street fights, no holds bars, which are the same thing. Any type of hardcore match that uses a plethora of weapons, the same spots seem to happen, sometimes in the same places in the same years. So it makes me question, does WWE need to get more creative with weapons to keep people's interest? Do we need to see more like newer weapons introduced? Or, more character specific weapons like we've seen with Triple H with the sledgehammer, or Boss Man with the nightstick, or even in more recent years, Bray Wyatt with the mallet, which I'm still waiting on them to use that to their full potential. But, like, it makes me think, do weapons do they need a new lease on life? Do they need to be refreshed? Do we need to see newer weapons, old weapons be brought back, other ways to show this brutality? So that's kind of where my head is at after watching Hell in a Cell, because I noticed a lot of the same weapons are being used over and over again in the cell outside of the Samoan strap.
Yeah, and it's a cool thing to bring up because I remember last episode, as you guys would either see on YouTube pretty soon or on demand, whatchamacallit, the biggest match that was talked about was that Hell in a Cell I Quit match, and partly due in part because the strap was implemented and you had the stipulation of I quit, which has not been greatly used. But I think that not only I agree, I feel like that's a situation where a lot of, we talked about a lot of the match types, of which we can have another episode of Bell to Bell about being normalized, chair shots being normalized, certain things of that nature. When you get that sense of, all right, when I see a chair walk come into the ring, I already know what's going to happen. Either like somebody's going to be suplexed or power bombed or whatever onto it. It's going to be used as a honorary table, or it's going to be used, for the traditional gut and then lower back combo. It's going to be a tough sell because now, like, you kind of get the sense of, all right, for example, um just imagine how impactful a Bailey versus Sasha Banks match would have been had we not seen a kendo stick used in 2 years, 3 years,
Yeah.
or to that extent.
And that opens up the question. Like, there are many different, angles you can see this from. For example, what you're saying, would it be better if WWE sticks to focus on finishing a lot of their storylines in the ring,
Mm,
using the bare minimum to finish their stories so that weapons can matter more when they're introduced? I think that's kind of interesting because I know most casual fans who dip in and out are going to be like, oh, well, we're used to it. But for the people who stick around, the people who are really trying to help keep the ratings around, I think that's a detail that people would appreciate. If more matches finished in the ring, whether it be shenanigans, clean finishes that aren't decisive, like roll ups, but are smart finishes, or even decisive finishes, if more of that was like implemented and weapons were used less,
mm,
that would make weapons feel more impactful. But I do think because weapons are such a big focal point in pro wrestling, I would opt more to find a balance between the in ring and
yeah,
use of weapons because I think that it's an expectation. It's something that you can use at your disposal so you can make it feel new by not using it for a while and then bring it back and then have a streak with it and then let it go. Like you can kind of, dip in and out with using them. For me personally, that's kind of why I'm calling for more of a variety of weapons. Because if you see the same weapons over and over again, as much as you appreciate the punishment that these guys are taking to, paint their canvas, so to speak, you are going to start getting bored if you see the same watercolors. You are going to start getting bored if you start seeing the same elements used in the same ways over and over again, which makes me think, like, why do we don't have to just see kendo sticks and chairs? We know the steel steps can be used, and we usually pop when we see the steel steps get thrown and stuff like that because they're not used very often. But after a while, as a wrestling fan, you get bored of that a bit too. It makes me question, how come we can't use the ring bell anymore? Or you don't see the championship belt itself be used more often for
you
ramming
know,
effects. I don't know if that's part of the head protocol as well.
yeah,
That I didn't research, but in the case that it's not, it makes me wonder because I brought up to you before in a previous conversation before you get to your point about Dakota Kai and Tegan Knox's match at NXT TakeOver this year, or I believe it was this year, and she got cracked over the head with a cookie sheet,
yeah,
and it made me wonder
yeah,
what is the protocol for headshots because some people get hit in the head with the trash can, which I also miss, and a cookie sheet. And I understand why the chair's banned, but can you not feign like a headshot with a bell? Is it too risky? Is it too risky to use the title? Because I've heard from people, getting cracked with a title isn't fun. We all know that, but it's not easy to deflect either because it's running at you. It's like it makes me wonder what are their options and how can they use their options.
yeah. It's a very tough situation. Couple points. You did bring up the fact that like certain elements in matches could be, kind of Paul Heyman, like where you like give just a little bit as the rivalry continues. I mean, I think that's why people, although, because of other things like a Roman Reigns and Jey Uso rivalry or Sasha Banks and Bailey turning into what it's turned into, the whole Randy Orton Drew McIntyre dynamic, I believe that we're going to look upon with with glowing eyes in some respects because it did start off with a match that just showed that Drew out wrestled Randy at SummerSlam, and then it built to a match where Orton like got like even he took out his anger on the legends, and the legends
Yeah.
did him in. And then in the last match, it was that no, by myself as the heel, I outsmarted you with a weapon that is not normally seen. This just random red
The steel pipe.
steel pipe. And that basically was utilized to his advantage, and he ended up winning. So a lot of those things. I will say, you said it, you touched on it a little bit. The whole character specific weapons. I think
Yeah.
that's something that is big. You think of like, you know, John Cena and a chain. You
Yes.
think of William Regal and brass knucks.
Yes.
You think all these different types of stuff. Hell, I could even just throw in just the fear of having Jake the Snake having the
The
snake
snake.
ringside, you know? Um, as a wrestling fan,
Hmm.
would you be like more inclined to see like more superstars come in with those character specific, you know, weapons? Seth Rollins coming in with a random book that's his quote unquote Bible or something,
I
or
wish Devon really
like,
used that
you
more
know what I mean?
during the
Like,
T-shirt
or
campaign.
yeah.
I yeah, look, I'm a and you know one of my all time favorites is Finley with the shillelagh as well. Shout out to Fit Finley.
Oh, oh, that's
Um,
and that
you
was
know,
so protected. I think
yes,
people
but it
would,
looked so good.
yeah,
Like, but then again, Finley was one of the best workers of all time. Seriously, like that dude
yeah.
was one of the toughest dudes to ever do it. And I really do want to see more character specific weapons. I think that would help with the variety issue. Because chairs are a pretty generic weapon. Kendo sticks have become a pretty generic weapon. We see what we know people associated with ladders, like the Hardys, Edge and Christian and whatnot. But a ladder has become so commonplace now because we've had a lot more ladder matches in recent years. That
I
unless
will
some,
I will say a little bit though, like even though like a lot of the like the tables, ladders, and chairs specifically, like they've been kind of more commonplace, even when they've kind of been implemented in like storylines. Again,
Mhm.
Sasha using Sasha and Bailey as an example, I think that was a perfect like even the most desensitized weapon could be used as a character specific weapon.
And that's the
You know?
creativity of it, and that's something that it's not just the weapons but how the wrestlers use it as well, because that's
Exactly.
another part of the point. Like if it's going to be gut shot, crack to the back, or ram, with the ladder, or this and that, like of course you're going to sit there and be like you're going to not feel it as much because everyone does it. But my thing with character specific weapons and variety is like in the case of character specific weapons, it's something that can add to the psychology of a match because it's an element you have to consider now when you fight somebody like this. For example, Triple H only brought out the sledgehammer in hardcore matches typically, or in segments. It wasn't like a weapon on standby like Finley Shillelagh or Boss Man's nightstick. Like there are levels to how you use them as well, because Bray Wyatt's not going to bust it. Well, actually, with Bray, you never know. But as far as we've seen of Bray Wyatt, you don't see him bust out the mallet whenever he feels. Usually, the mallet is hidden somewhere, and in the right environment, he'll bust it out, similar to Triple H. And I think that alone would help with the weapons issue because one, you have a variety. You see new weapons in the helm. You see that there are levels to the weapon, so you don't know when to expect the weapon to come out. And depending on how the person uses the weapon, you can have it every match. You could have it every other match. If it's so common in their repertoire, the wrestler can trick you into thinking they're going to use it and then just out wrestle you. And now it's a mind game, or it's a deciding factor in a match, whether it be used or not. And that's one of the things I liked about the brass knucks and the chain from Cena and the shillelagh. Those weapons were used common enough that somebody has to scout for it when they go into the fight. And now it could be hanging over their head like a dark cloud. You're just wondering, when's it going to come out? Can I survive long enough? Can I avoid it? Do
The
I have
ref,
to beat
ref,
him?
ref, ref, check them for the brass knucks and
Right.
everything.
Or like have ref
Shit.
be like, yo, ref, pat them down. Now it
Yeah.
can't be used. That adds an element to the match. Like there's so many different ways it can get you interested in the match. And as a competitor, it makes you think of different ways of how to do a match or how to go into a match, whether you think of it from a sports standpoint or from like an artist creative standpoint. Like the ways that it plays with your mind, it immediately draws an interest, which makes you want to see what happens. And that's the point. You want to draw people to see what's going on because now they can believe that this weapon is going to play a role somehow in the match. And on the side of how wrestlers use weapons, a lot of this comes with, sometimes the WWE will flat out shut down ideas because they're just ridiculous and absolutely not. I don't care. Like Charlotte wanted to moonsault off a cell. That's no. Like, as many times as I've seen Jeff and Shane nearly kill themselves, at least they took a bump where it's like, I'm not gonna land on my feet from this distance.
Yeah,
Like I'm just gonna
and
like,
Charlotte stays landing on her feet during these moons, like corkscrew everything.
and even from that, like what happens if your neck get caught in the announce table after from that? Ugh, I don't want to think about it. So
Let,
you
let
know,
me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question.
what's up?
So with all of this, implementing like putting character into breathing character, breathing life into these weapons,
Yes.
what would you say would be the biggest beneficiary from implementing this? Whether it be, like bringing in the new whatchamacallit weapons and making them even character specific.
I think that the benefit of having these new weapons as I try to, my legs are falling asleep as I hold up this laptop, and I apologize. My body is hurt. I just came back from work. But what do you call it? I think the benefit of character specific weapons or creativity in how people use weapons is that it gives them another layer to their character that immediately makes them interesting when you know that element of their character can be expressed. So when you see them in an extreme environment, you think to yourself, "Oh shit, Jeff's in a ladder match. This man dominated TLC, which is basically the same thing in a horror film. I'm going to expect Jeff to have an advantage." If Shelton Benjamin does really well in Money in the Bank ladder matches, if Shelton were to be added to a new Money in the Bank ladder match in the next couple years, you have an expectation of Shelton because of his previous performances, regardless of his age or how long he's been in the business. You at least expect him to know how to maneuver with it. You've seen it with guys like Christian. You've seen it with guys like Jeff. You've seen it with guys like Shelton just in terms of ladders, Edge, Matt, in terms of hardcore environments. If a person like, for example, back when they did the ECW reboot and it wasn't like '07 version with like Punk and Morrison, but it was more so like the one night stand era of that stuff. If Matt Hardy pulled up in ECW, you're not going to sit here and be like, oh, what? Why are you here? I mean, maybe a little bit out of shock, but you think to yourself, Matt's kind of a good fit because he has a history of throwing his body on the line with weapons. And that comes from his use and creativity of weapons in the past. It immediately draws an interest when you enter an environment that's similar to what you're known for. And when you see, for example, in Ring of Honor, Chris Hero used to have a padded elbow,
Yeah.
a padded elbow pad that he could use with all of his discus forearms, his rip cords in the forearms.
You know,
It was a
now that you mention it, again, after Hell in a Cell, we saw the Randy Orton Undertaker rivalry. You saw Cowboy Bob Orton with the cast.
with the cast. Another one in terms of padded gear, D'Lo Brown used to wear like a padded like little
Best.
vest,
Yeah.
which would help impact with his frog splash. And it's like these little clever things, these attentions to detail make you care about characters a lot more. I mean, there was a point where Hardcore Holly was walking out, not Hardcore, Crash Holly was walking out with a scale. You know, Al Snow was walking out with head because yes, and there were so many reasons why
Because
that.
2000. Because 2000.
Yes, I don't care. It was very clever, and it makes you interesting. And even to the hardcore fan, they'll appreciate the attention to detail. The casual fan becoming a hardcore fan may become a hardcore fan because of that attention to detail. And to the casual fan who's just watching a little bit, they'll be like, "Oh, there's head guy. Oh, there's the dude with the shillelagh," but they remember you. And if you continue pushing on with the character, it'll get to the point where they're going to recognize you in a fashion where it's like you're not just shillelagh guy. You're a smart dude because you had a shillelagh. Or you're this guy because you had that weapon, which immediately builds your brand, builds your base. And the more people you interact with, the better you could tell those stories using that. And it doesn't have to define you either. It's just an element of you that you could use for a storyline. Maybe you use it for a year and in the rest of your career, you don't go back to it, but we remember how smart you were with this or how you did this. I said it on the podcast. Sasha Banks is one of the most creative Hell in a Cell competitors of all time in 3 appearances. And it's because her use of weapons has been ridiculous. A table ramp, putting Becky Lynch on a chair and beating her on a chair that was against a wall. I give it to the Usos as well. There was a point where they had dude trapped in the cell using the kendo sticks
Yeah.
in a creative fashion to beat him down. And these are the things that really stick out to people. And that's kind of why I brought this to the table because something as simple as a weapon. You know, wrestling and weapons don't go hand in hand, but they do go for walks with each other. All right. So you have something as simple as a weapon, and the ways you manipulate that weapon can immediately make you more interesting. A lot of wrestlers from ECW got over for their use of weapons, their use of the environment. One of the most notable cases is Sabu, who could wrestle on the mat, but more people could tell you how he manipulated using half of his finishers involved a chair. So like,
Yeah.
and you have people like Abdullah the Butcher who use a fork, but we don't have to go that far. My point being is like there's so many different ways you can sell somebody. And you brought up even things that are just not even a weapon, but act like a weapon. Like
Yeah.
you brought up Jake the Snake's snake. Tara and TNA had a tarantula in a little cage that she used to use as an intimidation weapon. Like things like that work very well and they help make a character more interesting. And I think that whether it's as subtle as a padded elbow pad, brass knucks, more blatant like a sledgehammer, shillelagh, or a nightstick, or a Joker mallet, it doesn't matter because the levels of how you can use a weapon has so many creative lanes that you can
So
make
many.
characters more interesting. And it doesn't necessarily, like, unless the company says everybody has to get a weapon, you can have a good amount of them too and it doesn't get boring. As a matter of fact, the more you have in most cases, the more interesting it gets. Because now you're starting to wonder what dynamics, like you're thinking of like video game like dream situations where you're like, yo, I would love to see William Regal and Finlay fight in a pure wrestling match. Like, fuck yes. But imagine if one of them gets the shillelagh when the ref is down, the other one gets the brass knuck when the ref is down. And now we have a Texas gunslinging, like we have a little showdown in the middle of, like, who's going to shoot the bullet first? And hell, in some cases, some people don't even have to have a specific weapon. Some people just are really good at cheating and use multiple weapons to their advantage, a la Eddie Guerrero, who has used a chair, ring bell, title. Hell, he slapped the referee with a BDSM like little strap. He slapped him with a belt on his ass and got dude disqualified. So that's all I'm saying. I'm saying that there's so many different ways to go about making things creative, so
There's a
that
lot
when
of
we
potential.
watch those segments, we're not just seeing crack to the back all the time or kendo whip to the back all the time. Now we can have like characters be built through weapons, or if there are more weapons under the ring, hell, I would like to see somebody get beat with a crate. Like you hit somebody with a crate that had water bottles underneath. That's creative. Like why the fuck would you pick a crate first? And now you're interested. Or if you see something under the ring, like some cables, like some wire cables, you could whip them with the cables. I want to see other things. I don't want now. Don't get me wrong. This is not me saying I want to see wrestlers get hurt with multiple different things. That's fucking torture. What I'm saying is that if you could use it productively, you can immediately draw interest into the show, and you get more hits on your YouTube channel. Be like, he hit him with a what? And now you want to see how this weapon got implemented. So I do think weapon variety, whether it be the amount of weapons we see on TV being used, or the ways that they're used by the talent, whether it be specificness or in situation-based situations, I really think it can help the company. And I think it can make up for the fact that we don't get the typical brutality that we were conditioned to, see. We don't get the chair shots to the head anymore, sure. But I think it's kind of cool that somebody is using a padded knee pad. Like if Daniel Bryan had a padded knee pad to amplify his Bazaiku knee, it's like, why wouldn't you? You know?
Yeah, no, most def. And like there's even stuff that we didn't even mention that don't necessarily categorize as weapons, but in some cases they don't have to make the characters. It could be an attribute. Some it does. Santino Marella.
Cody. Mr.
Mankind.
Sacco.
Mankind, you know what I mean? So you have those things that basically could make
Can you
so
imagine if like Matt Riddle in a segment just started beating somebody with his flip flops?
oh my god, it would be hilarious. No, just doing like he'll do like he'll chop you because he'll do like the series of chops with his
Yeah.
flip flops. Just slap you with a flip flop. Da 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 da. Slap. Drop some
Or
more.
like Shotzi Blackheart with her helmet.
Oh my god. I mean that's torture. But still, you know what I mean? Even still, like that, the possibilities are endless. Like the entire like this whole thought process. I mean, of course, you have the helmets. Matt Riddle, he has the flip flops. I brought up the whole jokingly,
Steve
since
Austin with his metal knee braces.
you know what I mean. Literally, Roman came out with a glove. He could use that glove in some capacity, and
You can
well,
load it
already
up.
he does. You know, I mean,
No,
so those
not
different
like this.
avenues that you, yeah, not like that, please. But those are avenues of which you can go towards, and for all intents and purposes, for the people, for the designers, it makes a very, very, if they are creative about that, it makes a lot of the graph from the people who are creating the posters, their job's a lot more easier. The market is a lot more easier. Can you imagine a Hell in a Cell photo with Bray Wyatt and whatchamacallit, Alexa Bliss doing like dual mallet poses?
And it's not just for the E too, because the graphics also extend it. Because AEW recently banned
AW,
unprotected headshots.
yeah.
You see Hikaru
Shawn
Shida
Spears
walking
being
around.
champion.
Hikaru Shida walks around with her Kendo Shinai more times. Actually, it was a storyline at a point where she was trying to find out where the hell it went, which is another avenue you could use with it. You can make random comedic storylines with it as well. Be like, oh well, I can't, like, how like in 2007, I believe it was Armageddon. No, maybe not Armageddon. I think it was a different event. Maybe it was a Survivor Series. I remember Randy Orton and Shawn Michaels fought, where Shawn Michaels couldn't use the Sweet Chin Music, which forced Shawn Michaels to use a lot of submissions. He was using crossfaces, sharpshooters, figure fours, trying to find different ways to win. The same thing can happen with the weapon. If
Yeah,
you ban the weapon from ringside, and now a heel's like, okay, I can't use that weapon. I'm using another one and cheat. Progresses a storyline. Or the weapon is so crucial to the character that they actually lose because they can't use it. We saw that in the case of Eddie Guerrero and Batista in No Mercy, when Eddie said, I'm not going to cheat. And he had a chance to cheat and win the World Heavyweight Championship, and he didn't. There's so many different creative avenues which can give wrestlers a little, not so much creative control, but more creative freedom to get over their products, so that even if they're not in a big position, some of them can organically get over just off their creativity
yeah.
using it, which has to be fulfilling as an
That's a fact.
artist.
That,
So
that's a fact. And for the love of God, we brought up a bunch of the Eddie Guerreros of the world, the William Regals of the world. This may not be a weapon that's a part of the ring, but that turnbuckle, use that goddamn thing, please. Use
it's funny,
it.
the women's division uses that a lot, in terms
Exactly.
of like bottom
Exactly.
turnbuckle bumps. I mean, Bailey's made the
No,
same
but
flip right
uncorking
there.
it though, like uncorking that bad
Yeah,
boy and going back.
it's funny. No one
So
removing the turnbuckle is the top one's usually the typical, but like the bottom one would be pretty cool, especially for the women's division, since that's the running theme. The
yeah,
middle one, maybe you unwrap two of them, like you unwrap one on one side, referee goes to that, you wrap the other one,
yeah.
do something like that. So yeah, there's so many different
There's
ways to do it.
That's a fact, man.
I just
And
remembered Bo Dallas with his Bo Leave sign. That should have been a
yeah.
weapon.
And now I'm being triggered. Although like it did do Kairi Sane in one time. I'm just picturing like, Nia Jax like deciding buckle bomb, uncorking it, and just like going to town. But that's a story for another day. Because that hey, listen, that could spark off a rivalry between her and Shayna Baszler once they split, because Vince
Another
McMahon don't
avenue.
like his tag teams, which is another Bella Bell episode that should be on the way. But that being said, Kid Ty, I salute you, my brother. Golden Child as always. Backstage Brawler Nation. Take care.